Towering above the corner of Olive Street and Grand Boulevard, the Continental's glistening white crust sparkles in the daylight, catching the eye of the passerby below. Its beauty and style reminiscent of a time when the sky was the limit and a man with ambition could do anything he set his mind to. Its iconic Art Deco style emerging in the St. Louis skyline like an artifact lost in time. Its beacon set ablaze as a reminder of the hope it embodies for this once great city. The Continental's birth, prime, death, and rebirth remind us what it means to truly bring something back to life. It is this storyline that makes this triumph of a tower an icon among the rubble. The story begins with an ambitious, driven, and self-innovated businessman from Leslie, Arkansas. A hometown hero from the backcountry, Ed Mays was a man with a hunger for power and a drive to succeed. As a young man, he quickly made his fortune in his small town manufacturing barrel staves from the local timber. From there, he opened his first bank and eventually made his way to St. Louis, where his personality could thrive. It is this eccentric will to succeed that landed him on the board of the Continental Life Insurance Company and his Grand National Bank. When the need arose for a new office space, it was Ed's ego that drove him to create the Continental Life Building, and he would do so in true Ed Mays style.
Ed Mays and the building have a lot in common. The building reflects a lot of his, not only a lot of his ego, but a lot of his ambition and I think dreams. But I don't know that I've ever run across somebody that I've really done research on who's been that much of kind of an aggressive, eclectic personality. He wanted to be the biggest, most important banker in town. He wanted to own the biggest insurance company in town. And as he said, with high ground, he could, in his penthouse at the top, look down on all of the downtown banks. And that's really what drove him to want to build a building of that size. Because nobody else would have built that thing. It doesn't make any sense. You have to have an ego that overcomes common sense, economics, and everything that goes with it, and then a big enough salesmanship to sell it. And as people of his type, when times are good, they roll all the dice, not just the two. They roll every die they can get their hands on. And they overreach, and Ed was not afraid of overreaching.
Ed was ready to gamble to create something truly iconic. The question now was, where to put the skyscraper? Ed found his answer in the rising area of Midtown, on the corner of Grand Boulevard and Olive Street, where the entertainment industry was just beginning to boom.
At one point, the corner of Grand and Olive became the most important urban corner in the St. Louis area, and some say at the time, because of all of the streetcars and buses and trams that connected there, they say it was the busiest corner in the United States. From its earliest days, it became the transition corner for a lot of reasons. It's the high point within the city. As you're on Olive going west, you hit the peak at Grand and then it descends slowly to the west. And the same way with Grand, as it comes from the south, it follows a ridge that was originally a deer path and then an Indian trail. And you typically would follow the high ground because if you're a wagon on a horse, it's not muddy. And so where those two came together really became the corner of Grand and Olive. So that corner at one time was the transition. And if you were an important tenant, the doctors, the fraternal organizations, the theaters, all wanted to be at the location where anyone could get there, everyone could get there, and that was Grand and Olive.
With his prime location acquired, Mays could set out to complete the most magnificent building St. Louisans had ever seen. No expense would be spared in his conquest to create the largest and most eye-catching building in St. Louis. When it was all said and done, Ed had spent more money per square foot on the Continental than was spent on the Empire State Building. his money can be seen expressing his flamboyant and flashy personality in the Art Deco style that shapes the 1920s.
The Art Deco style, the thing that really defined it beyond any style in the past was it was designed to reflect the energy and potential of the United States. You see the energy in the patterns, and it's about us conquering nature. It's electricity, it's gas, it's railroads, it's all of the things that, we pump our muscles around the kinds of things we not only had accomplished, but we hope to accomplish.
It was this achievement that Ed Mays had in mind when he designed his spectacular high-rise. The building's modernistic Art Deco style made it a new and unique place to work. This luxurious look, combined with a key location, made the Continental an attractive place for businesses looking to rent.
The Continental was the best office building of its time in the city. It had all of the named tenants, including Thomas Edison, General Motors, DeSoto, all of what we call today, the Facebook and Apple companies had offices in the Continental.
Not only did the Continental offer a bright and shining office space, but it wouldn't truly be complete without the penthouse that decked out the top 3 floors. This grand space was the crowning jewel of Ed Mays' new tower and allowed for him and his family to be in the highest residence in St. Louis. It was complete with a grand staircase, a fountain, and a study for Ed to work in when he wasn't downstairs. When the building was finished, it was nothing short of striking. However, it wouldn't remain this way for long. Times were changing, and so was Ed Mays' luck. On July 27th of 1934, a knock came at the door of the penthouse of the Continental Life Building. It was a sheriff's deputy serving an eviction notice to Ed Mays and his family. After only controlling the building for a few short years, Ed Mays was being removed from his own masterpiece. In the years prior, the money needed to continue operating the building and Mays' lavish lifestyle was running short. Ed was spending money he didn't have, and eventually the debtors came to collect. A nasty court battle would ensue, and eventually the court would take custody of the Continental and all Ed's assets. The building would change hands many more times over the next few years, but none of the proprietors could keep the building full. One of the main reasons for this was the change in transportation.
It was really the automobile that killed not only the Continental, but the whole area, because when you have a densely developed area like Grand Center, everyone got there on the streetcar or the bus. All of a sudden, when you drive there with your car, every piece of ground was developed with a building. So there's no place to put the cars, and so pretty much the world bypassed Grand Center. And the tenants moved to places where there was a lot of parking.
The extreme lack of parking, the increasing deterioration of the building made marketing to new tenants incredibly difficult. By 1973, the current owner of the building, New York Life, had made the decision to close the Continental stores to the public. However, the ultimate downfall of the building came to a head in early February of 1978.
The ultimate end of, and really demise of the building as far as its ability to operate came when the pipes froze and there was no heat in the building and the basement filled with water. And what really saved the building from being torn down at first was the cost of tearing, in essence, a 25-story building down, which is adjacent to other buildings. There's no room to go with it. And then later, the fact that there was $1.5 million of asbestos. The ground wasn't worth what it would cost to tear it down, so it just stood.
After the water main break, it didn't take long before looters took note of the building's ornate and unique decoration. The once great halls of the majestic tower soon became nothing more than a payday for common thieves.
Starting about the time the Fox was renovated, in 1981, people really started to come in and set up tables and systematically take the doors, the molding, the door handles, the window handles, anything that had value of over 5 cents they took, and that got scrapped. It got either melted down, sold off, and sadly, that was the only thing that was worth any money in the Continental, was the little bit of ornamentation that was inside.
With the Continental stripped to the bones, and with no hope for restoration in sight, most people gave up on the iconic symbol as just another run-down building in a sea of crumbling architecture. But where most people saw an eyesore, Steve Trampy saw potential.
I got to know the building as a shell with piles of trash and piles of rubble that had of collapsed walls. I got used to the 10-foot tree growing on the 5th floor. That's the way I first knew the building. When I was a kid, my dad had talked about this place where this guy lived on the top with a fountain. And to me, as a 5-year-old, I thought, how can a fountain be 20 stories in the air? Because water runs downhill. That's the only story I'd heard about the building. And I didn't even connect those two until I eventually realized where the fountain had been.
The fountain was just the beginning to the relationship that Steve had started with the iconic skyscraper. In the years spanning 2000 to 2002, Steve and a crew of hundreds of contractors, artisans, and historians slowly began breathing life back into the rundown building. They took out walls, remodeled old molding, and tried their best to restore the beautiful artwork that had been stolen so many years before.
It was incredibly gratifying to put a lot of those back where they had been taken by the time we did it 20 years before. For me and for those that worked closely on it, it was an incredibly emotional thing to find the lost children of Israel and to be able to put them in and say, you're back home. It was just a neat aspect of the whole development.
The installment of these lost treasures was the symbol of hope and rebirth to all that lay eyes on. The future of the Continental was changing, but so was the future of America. In an awestruck moment across the nation, the Continental found itself providing a different type of hope.
When 9/11 occurred, I think that a lot of the construction workers really affected by it because they'd worked on other similar buildings. They felt, as much besides the human loss, the loss of a building, that there were a lot of people on the Twin Towers that had a lot of pride in building. And there's a sisterhood of high-rises, of iconic skyscrapers. And, the Continental was a close relative of the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building because we were built basically at the same time, same materials, same idea of America's future. And the Twin Towers were just a later relative, but a very closely related one. So we felt a very close relationship. And I think that, I just remember calling a wholesale flag place and saying, I want to buy the biggest flag you can find. And they went out and they found a huge flag, and I think the flag was 10 stories tall, and we hung it, and it was as much for, I said, the people that worked on the building as it was for the rest of us.
A provision of hope, an icon of dreams, a reminder of perseverance. Over 70 years after Ed Mays originally opened the doors of the Continental Building, its rehabilitation was complete and its beacon relit. The iconic St. Louis landmark once again twinkled against the dark sky. The life had been restored to a building who had lost it so many years ago.
The Continental Building, and really the Continental Life Building, I even find myself falling into the trap of leaving out the word life because for so many years people left it out. To me, it's just neat giving it, life again, that the word should be in there. It's a legacy in itself, not so much for me, but for the city, and that hopefully it'll be there another 100 years and 200 years. And when we found the workers' initials and names and in the walls as we redid it and we gutted it, it was really for my son to put his initials in the concrete in the penthouse when we did it. So that when it gets gutted and redone, another 50 years, somebody's going to find his initials. And they may find him. He may still be alive. I hope he's still alive. And they're going to ask him stories about the building the way we did to Ed Mays' relatives in Arkansas when we did it. And I think that will continue. And that's what an iconic landmark in a city is supposed to be. Something, really something to every generation. And that's where I hope the building fits into the legacy and the history and future of St. Louis.